So at the end of last year, I had this idea that I wanted to go into 2025 with a clean slate as far as reading went. Like, I did not want to carry over any books from 2024 into 2025. And what this led me to do was to have a stack of about 4 books at the end of the year that I really, really needed to get through. Like, 2 of them, I was only like maybe 20 pages in. One of them I hadn't started, but it was a Christmas book. So like I had always intended to read it during Christmas. And then another one, I think I had about 160 pages left. I made that decision on December 20th. By December 27th, I had read every book except for the one where I had 160 pages left. So I made a lot of progress, and I think by that time, like, I had read probably like over 600 pages in that week, and I knew that I couldn't meet that goal. The issue with it was, one, I was completely burned out because that's way more than I would normally read in a week. 2, that particular book was a nonfiction sort of self-help book that I knew I wanted to actually retain information from, and I knew that I was not going to read it again if I sped through it and didn't retain any of the information. And 3, this was my first year doing like a lot of book content, and so I didn't have a protocol for the end of the year, and I ended up coming up with all these ideas that I wanted to do, and I was like staying up all night making this content, trying to get it all out before the end of the year, sometimes posting even 3 times a day, trying to get all of my end of year content out before 2025. Long story short, I was like, I'm gonna just give up on that. You know, I got all of my end of year content out before 2024 ended, except for this video, because I really, really, really wanted to do a blind ranking of the books that I read last year. And I just simply couldn't get to it. So all that being said, I am going to try to stop making weird arbitrary rules. We're still in January. I think it's still relevant, the books that I read last year. So without further ado, I'm going to do a blind ranking, and we're going to talk a little bit about my 2024 reading. For my blind ranking, I have this hat with all the books that I read last year in them, and I'm going to pick them one by one and hopefully come up with a ranking that I agree with. This is an easy one. Waking Lions. I'm going to put this book at number 2. If you ask anybody, like, this year, I kept saying that this is one of the best books that I read this year. Honestly, I'm surprised I'm not putting it at number 1, but I just want to leave some room for other things. This book is technically, I think, classified somewhere in between a thriller and literary fiction. And it's about a doctor who is involved in a hit and run, and he does not know that there was a witness to the hit and run, and he is subsequently blackmailed in a way that honestly I wouldn't even have thought of. I got this book from a little free library, and I had to come up off of another book because I decided I was not going to give it back. This is the book that I would reread, and I'm just now getting into the concept of rereading books. It's not something that I've done a lot in the past, but I do think I want to reread 1 book a year at least. So at some point, this book is going to come back into my rotation. I will say, when I looked at other reviews of this book on Goodreads, I don't really use Goodreads, but I do have it just because, like, I make book content. When I saw some of the reviews, some people didn't like the writing, which is crazy to me because I actually really love the writing in this book. I feel like sometimes you read books and you're like, I could write a book. And then sometimes you read other books and you're like, I could never write a book. This is one of those I could never write a book books. I thought that it was written very, very beautifully. It was definitely a page turner. I could not put this book down, especially, like, I would say at least the first like half, there was a lot of velocity to it. And yeah, I highly recommend this book. I thought it was really, really good. This book grapples with ethical dilemma and self-preservation, of course, blackmail, and also immigration and humanity, where those two things intersect, and how we look at and treat people who are in a certain social class or position that may be different from our own. So yeah, lots of tension, lots of forward momentum. Highly recommend this one. We're starting at two opposite ends of the spectrum, and I don't know if that's going to make this easier or harder, because I feel like the middle ones are the ones that are going to be the hardest, and I don't know if it's going to be, I feel like it would be harder if they were the first ones I had to do. So, The Awkward Black Man by Walter Mosley. I had such high hopes for this book. I really, really did. And I also had a weird thing with short stories this year. I really felt like maybe I just don't like them. We'll get into that more, but there was one book this year. It was called The Trouble with Happiness by Tova Ditlevson. And I did not finish that book. That was a book of short stories. It really actually held me up in the momentum of reading for the year. And then this was a book of short stories. And if I haven't said it already, which I don't think I have, this goes in last place for me. The thing about it, I don't even know if it's just the book or if it's also the profound disappointment I felt with just having such high hopes for it. I feel like there are many layers to this. Of course, people of color in general, and then of course I am Black, so like I'm more in tune with that experience. But a lot of Black characters are not treated with a lot of nuance and just variety in our experiences. So then when I saw this, I'm like, okay, this is short stories about Black men who are from all these different walks of life and circumstances that you would not necessarily see them in other types of media. And it's written by a Black man, Walter Mosley, who is a very very prolific mystery writer. He writes hard-boiled mysteries, but has also written like over 60 books and has tried a lot of things. And this is him trying short stories, and I could not. Okay, I felt like a lot of them were very truncated. I know that they are short, but it was like the story would be like whatever, and then like in the last like page or like couple of paragraphs, it'd be like, oh, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and 30 years later, and this happened, and this happened, this happened. And I'm just like, the pacing wasn't there for me. It was the storytelling of it all. I was just left wanting more with a lot of the stories. And I felt like the more the book went on, the more I started to get irritated, because he also has a couple of idiosyncrasies with his writing. Mainly, you can tell he really, really likes coming up with the names of characters, because they all have really, really weird names that nobody is named in real life. And it's also really distracting because he will like name characters that are not important to the story. Like he'll say like, oh, so-and-so went into their home and the mailman named such and such came by and he gave him some mail from so-and-so and da-da-da. And it's just like, okay, we're wasting ink. If you want to do a short story, let's not use the ink on that. Let's use the ink on building out the story so that it doesn't feel like it ended too soon, which is what I felt like for a lot of these stories. And when I say it ended too soon, I just mean, again, the pacing of it, and not necessarily that I wanted them to be longer, because I was dragging my feet with this book. Like, by the end, I was so irritated, and I almost reached that point where it stops me from reading other things because I'm so stuck on it. And like I said, that's exactly what happened with that other book that I didn't finish this year. With this book, I am so deeply mourning what could have been, because one of the interesting things about it is a lot of the stories focus on middle-aged Black men. And that's a perspective that, honestly, even as somebody who was looking for more nuanced perspectives on and about Black men, that was not a particular subset that I had even considered or really thought about. And Walter Mosley, how old is Walter Mosley? He's probably like in his 80s now. And this book was written in 2020 or published in 2020. So still, he was probably still in his 80s or late 70s at the time. But it's important to remember that he was a bit of a late bloomer. I don't think he started writing novels until he was into his 30s. So I think that a lot of that coming of age, figuring yourself out, finding your path, sort of, those themes are something that didn't come up for him until he was, quite a bit older than you would think. So that's something that I did find really interesting about this book, and I'm also curious to know what people who are in that age group would think about it. Although I don't think the reason why I don't like it is because I can't relate to that. Like, I don't think that's it, but like, I'm open to to hearing otherwise. And I do just want to give a shout out to one story in this book. It's called Cut, Cut, Cut. That story was creepy as hell, but it was memorable because I do remember it. And you might like this book if you like sci-fi stuff. It's not all sci-fi, but it definitely has enough elements of it, and things that are like feel sci-fi-esque. Not in every story, but in a couple of them, but enough for me to like notice that as a recurring thing. Okay, the Sweeney Sisters. So I don't have this book with me because I got it from the library. This book, it was fine. Like, I liked it. I wasn't indifferent to it in a bad way. It was a very easy read. It was the first book I read in 2024, actually. So I really don't have much to say about it. It's basically about, I think, three sisters who their father is a very famous author, and they find out right after he passes away that they have another sister that they had no idea about, and they're grappling with that, and obviously feeling very blindsided by that. And also he was a famous author, so he has a lot of things that one might want to capitalize on, and so they're also kind of working through figuring out if is this person someone with true intentions, or someone more nefarious. But I would say it's an easy read. It's a feel-good novel because there's nothing like crazy about it, yeah, it was just pleasant. It was fun. Oh, I have to rate it or give it a ranking. 6. Yeah, because top 5 just seems not right, but 6. But it really definitely wasn't bad, so I'll put it at 6. Ooh. The Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl by Issa Rae. Now, first of all, you should know that Issa Rae can do no wrong in my eyes. Okay? Love her down. Love everything she does. I'm from Inglewood. I grew up watching Awkward Black Girl, the web series, and then I was in college and stuff when Insecure was on, and like I keep up with Issa very, very heavy. I first tried to read this book years ago. I think I tried to read it 3 times before I made it through it, because I don't know, it just wasn't doing it for me. I do think that it ends on a good note. I do think also that 2024 is the year that I was supposed to finish this book, because there was a portion of it towards the end that I actually felt really inspired by. It is a collection of essays and stuff like that. I do think that a lot of what I find really appealing about Issa's humor is her comedic timing, and her delivery of things is like so hilarious. And so I think that's something that's lost in a physical book. I did have somebody tell me that it's a lot better in audiobook form because she's reading it, and I definitely believe that, because then you add in all those other elements that I just mentioned, because she's incredibly witty, and that does come through in some spots in the book. Unfortunately, I am not an audiobook girly. I can only read a book physically, just because my brain, even with podcasts, I will lose my ability to pay attention really, really quickly. So I won't ever hear the audiobook for this book, but I'm kind of split on it because, like I said, I felt really inspired by some of it, but a lot of the time I was just like, it should not have taken me 3 times to read a book this thin. So I might regret this, but I think because I love Issa so much, and because I did feel energized by the end of the book, like I said, it finishes very strong to me, which I really liked. I'm gonna put it at number 5. So we'll see how I feel about that at the end. The Order of Things by Kaija Langley. Now, this is middle grade, so it's not something that I would normally read, but I have a book club that I do in the summer for my podcast, Classically Black, which is about Black culture and classical music. And so for our book club, we try to find things that sort of fit that mold. And this, obviously, you see a little girl on the cover playing the drums and someone playing the violin. It's a music-related book, and this was our book club pick. It was fine. Obviously, I'm an adult. I'm not the target audience for this. I don't think I really knew how middle grade it was when we picked it. Technically, our audience picked it, but even when we put it on the list of options, I don't think I realized that. I also didn't realize that it is written in verse for seemingly no reason. Honestly, that added nothing to the book for me, and for my co-host, and for anyone else that I've, to my knowledge. I think maybe because it's supposed to be like music related, that was the idea. But honestly, I just felt like it was a bit of a waste of paper to have so many pages that are like only half full, really. But basically, it's about a young girl who has a best friend. They're both musicians. Her friend is a prodigy, and he ends up going to this art school, and she's sort of grappling with the separation that puts between us. And then unfortunately the friend passes away, which, by the way, is in the synopsis, so it's not a spoiler. It's literally in the sleeve when you read the synopsis, so I think it doesn't come as a surprise. And one important thing to note is I think the author has some experience with the illness that the friend in the book is afflicted by, and part of her writing this book is to raise awareness for that because it affects children. So I think perhaps maybe she had a friend in her childhood that suffered from that illness. That being said, it was fine. Like I said, I am an adult, so obviously there is some depth lacking here that would be good for a child who would read middle grade. I definitely think there is enough depth and teachable moments and things like that for a kid. So if you have a kid in your life who reads middle grade, you can get this for them. Let me see. I would say maybe 7. You know what? I just realized I haven't been writing these down. I need to. I don't know which ones I've done and which ones I haven't. Hold on. Ooh, Luster by Raven Leilani. Now, this was a reread for me. I read Luster for the first time, I think, when it was published in 2020. And I really, really loved this book. It got a lot of acclaim, a lot of recognition. So obviously it's a pretty deeply loved book. Yeah, it's basically about a young adult woman Black woman who is having an affair with a married older white man, and circumstances align in which, align derogatory, for her to have to move in with him and his wife and his young adopted Black daughter. It's definitely Sagra literature. It's definitely not for the straight-laced. Everybody who I know in my life who is straight-laced, when I explain to them what this book is about, they're like, that sounds weird as fuck. And I'm like, yeah, well, so am I. So that's why I really, really like this book, and I liked it enough to read it again. And I know for a fact that I will read it a third time and fourth time and a fifth time. I think every couple years I'm going to come back to Luster. I don't know what it is. The writing is very poetic, I think, and not like unnecessarily poetic. I know that some people feel that way. I've read some reviews of people who have read it who just like couldn't get over the way that it's written. They felt like perhaps these people like more straightforward prose. But honestly, as somebody who doesn't really read poetry at all and very rarely likes the poetry that I hear, I am I feel like I'm very sensitive to when people are trying to be unnecessarily like poetic or roundabout or like purple prose, basically. People are trying to do that, and I don't think that's what Luster is, but it could just be a difference of opinion. So because I love this book so much, I'm gonna put it at number 4, only because it's a reread. I feel like that also implies how highly it's ranked, so I don't want to rank it higher than books that I read for the first time last year. But it does get bonus points for the cover. I love the cover of this book, and I hate when books have boring covers. Honestly, I feel like a bad cover is better than a boring cover. This cover is gorgeous. So, number 4. I feel like I willed this one to be next. I literally was like, when is When a Gangsta Wants You gonna come up? Because this book, I mean, as you can see, we have taken an extreme left turn from everything that we've listed so far. This was my very first urban fiction book. What inspired me to buy this book? TikTok, actually. And this is the only recommendation I've ever taken from TikTok. I have created a lot on TikTok, but I'm not really a TikTok girly. I don't really browse on there all that much. I usually get my book recommendations from editorial lists and usually Instagram. But I don't know, somebody was like, this book is so good, I read it in a couple hours, oh my gosh. And I was just like, you know, I've never read urban fiction. I feel like at the forefront of my experience with urban fiction has been like those ridiculous Quan Mills books, which I read an excerpt of a Quan Mills book and I was just like, I simply can't take it. But I don't know, something about the book and that recommendation made me want to get it. And my sister said that she reads exclusively urban fiction, so she said she would read it with me. And I think it's clear to me that I have not read the best of what urban fiction has to offer. However, I did enjoy myself reading this book. There were times that I had a good time, for sure. There were other times where I was just like, it's just getting to be a bit ridiculous. And I really can't gauge how that fits into the broader genre of urban lit, because like if you've ever read urban lit, you know there's a certain way that the characters talk, there's a certain way that it's written. It's almost always written in like AAVE, but like to an extent that in my life, as somebody who grew up around black people, went to school, black people, went to black church, all that type of stuff, black neighborhood, everything all black pretty much until I went to college, I just simply have not experienced. And so like I just feel like I know black people who don't talk like that all the time. So that's something that took me out of the story a little bit. Like it was just like a little bit extra. But I know that is, it's a part of the genre, but I think I won't know until I read more urban lit just how much. I think it's supposed to be messy, which this book definitely was messy. Lots of backstabbing, lots of daddy issues, real bad. But like I said, sometimes like you need that. Like I'm not somebody who believes like everything got to be all high and mighty and the best, like most meaningful art. Like I also don't want to say that, because it could be meaningful to this author. Like I'm not saying it's not meaningful, but like you know what I mean. Like not everything needs to be deep and serious and all that type of stuff. Like the book is crazy. It's crazy, and I feel like that's fine. You know, like there were some times where I had to put it down because I was just like, "Well, this is too much," and there were some times where I busted out laughing and stuff like that. And then there were some times, like I said, it just got a little bit too ridiculous for me, and it took me out of the story. Because there were just some decisions that the characters were making that, like, maybe I just don't know people in my life that make decisions like that. But it just seemed to defy logic and reasoning a little bit too much. And I feel like, yes, it's fiction, but when you're writing fiction that is like set in the real world, like you have to kind of adhere to that a little bit more. Like it has to be a little bit more realistic. And some stuff I felt like it was just outrageous for the sake of being outrageous. There is also a plot hole in this book, but it came out in 2024. So I'm like, that could either be a plot hole or that could be her setting up a sequel. And I hope it's the latter, not necessarily because I'm going to read it, which I might, who knows, but like just, you know, because plot hole kind of crazy. But I just realized I didn't give y'all a summary. Basically, it's this young girl. I don't know how old she is. I think she's like 19 or something like that. Long story short, her man is in prison, which he got like 15 years in prison. I'm like, girl, 19, you're 19. He got 15 years. Hang it up flat screen. Like, it's never that deep. I think he got it like reduced. But anyway, he treats her terribly, like way more terribly than you would think. Like, think of the most like terrible and then like double that. to a point where it's almost just, like I said, ridiculous. But anyway, his big brother is like this hot shot kingpin gang person, I don't know. And they start, and it just gets messier and messier and messier from there. So yeah, I'm really trying not to cheat. I think I'm gonna put this one at number 12. All right, T, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. This is the best book I read in 2024. This goes in the number 1 slot. Offer it. It's been on my TBR for years. I think this one also came out in 2020. And I don't know, just from the title, I was like already intrigued. And this is also what made me realize, okay, I don't hate short stories. I just read 2 bad short story collections or short story collections that I didn't like last year. And this I read towards the end of the year. Oh, I didn't read 2, I read 3. We'll get to that. I read this towards the end of the year, and it is also short stories, and it ended up being at the top of my list. So, me and short stories, we might go together real bad. This book is exactly what it sounds like. It's The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. Every story is different women who have some sort of connection to the church. And it dives into a personal matter that they're going through. And I think in the way that I was expecting and hoping to hear, something a little bit more substantive. I don't want to say substantive from the Awkward Black Man, but in the way that I was expecting to hear something a little bit more intriguing than what I got from that book, that's what I got in this book. Because even though there were not a lot of stories that I could personally relate to, there didn't need to be, I really, really liked how the author dealt with this sort of like contradiction that a lot of the girls and women in this book were grappling with. I feel like it was the real life manifestation of like expectation versus reality, because if you've grown up in church and around that environment, that there are rules and there's a lot of expectation that exists outside of church as well. But I think because that's at the center of this book, it really skewed towards the old school version of the Black church, in which there's a lot of expectation projected on especially women, and to see how these women and girls dealt with that, it was just like there were some stories in here that were pretty moving. And I think in a short story collection, there's always one story that you wish was longer. And there's a story in this book called How to Make Love to a Physicist. I did not want that story to end. And I think it is, it's not lost on me that it is the one story I felt like I could personally relate to. And I just really fucking loved it. Like, I just really loved it. I'm sure I'll read this book again. I would read this book again. But I'll read that story again. I might read it again, actually, after I finish this video, low key. Like, I really, really loved it. And like I said, expectation versus reality was a big thing. I also feel like family and duty was also another big thing about this book, because there are certain things that we deal with in our families and in our close relationships that are not easy to come to terms with, and to see how women in different stages of their lives kind of work through those things, while also in some cases trying to stay in the quote unquote good graces of the church, of their faith, and in some cases completely abandoning it and saying fuck that, so I just felt like there was a lot of nuance, a lot of variety, a lot of beauty, and of course some difficult moments. But as somebody who can be quite emotional, I don't remember being like there are certain books that I don't like because they're like just too sad, and I didn't get that from this book. I just thought it was, pretty beautiful. So, number 1. Color Television by Danzy Senna. Now, if you follow book accounts, you've probably seen this book. It was published, I think, in September or October of 2024. So fairly new book. And it got a lot of press, a lot of acclaim. I think, yeah, it was definitely one of the books I heard about the most. What drew me in is, of course, y'all know me. The cover, I love the cover of this book. I think it's so pretty. And looking at it, it made me realize that this is the first fuck up in the ranking, because this one is not going to be ranked as high as I think it should be, simply because there's another one coming down the pike that I cannot not have in my top 5. I went through a bit of a roller coaster with Color Television. When I first started reading it, I wasn't feeling it, just because it's about an author who is biracial. She's a professor, and she's writing her second book, and she's really struggling with that. And she decides that, you know what, I'm going to try to make it as a TV writer in Hollywood. I'm going to take this big project that I've been working on for like 10 years, this book, and try to see if I can finesse it and make it into something a little bit different, because I think she saw like her peers around her getting a little further with, you know, not sticking to that traditional writing path that she was on. And so she decides to, you know, try to see what happens in Hollywood. Well, I won't spoil it for you, but of course things don't go as planned. The reason why I would say I got a little bit of whiplash with like coming around to this book and my feelings about it changing, the protagonist's biracial identity is very integral to the book. And the way that the author was writing about it gave very much insider, just the way that she was writing about Blackness, the way she was writing about like having a connection to Blackness. And I'm like, looking at Danzy Senna, and I'm like, this lady looks white to me. But, you know, having seen a lot of different types of Black people in my life, I was like, but she could be white passing. So I looked into it. Yes, turns out her father was Black. So that's what made me be like, okay, hold on. Because now, you know, the way that it's written is not necessarily bothering me so much, because she is a Black woman. She's just white passing. Because at first when I thought like a white lady was writing like that about Black people, I was like, yeah, I might not finish this book for real, because it just got like, it just was giving very much insider in a way that I was not comfortable with when I thought the author was white. Long story short, found out she was Black. I came around to it, especially towards the middle. I felt like I started to gain more momentum on this book. I did think a lot of reviews said that it was funny. I didn't necessarily think it was funny, but I thought it was very interesting. My feelings did change a little bit towards the end when I looked more into her background and I found out that her dad was actually half Black. And I was just like, girl, hang it up, flat screen. Like, I'm not trying, I don't know. That just made me feel like the level of confusion and pontificating over Blackness, it just felt like, I don't, like, why at this point? Like, I just don't get it. You don't really move through life as a Black person. And I don't know. I think that something that I learned about the author is that I think she was very much raised to feel like, you know, like, I am Black. And of course, like, her dad looked Black. He was half Black, but he looked Black. And I don't really know, that's not my like experience. So like, I don't really know what it's like to have that sort of like confusion. And especially, I know people who are biracial they look Black, you know, and struggle with that. So I can't really imagine if you're somebody who passes for white, but you feel like you're Black. Like, that is sort of a mind fuck to me, and it's not something that I really understand. And so that's also what kind of made it challenging for me, especially knowing that a lot of her other books center around that biracial identity as well. And it just was like, girl, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I just feel like it just really came to a point. She uses the word mulatto a lot in this book. I feel like perhaps that, I don't want to call it an identity crisis, but like that struggle with identity has been something that has obviously kind of dominated the author's life. And it just, it was, at times it just got to be a little bit too heavy-handed. And like, again, if that's your experience, you might connect a little bit better with it. But it just got to be like, okay, girl, we get it. It's one side and the other side, you don't know where you belong, and da 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 da. And there was like a lot of like poking fun also at the biracial identity, which maybe that's where people thought the humor came from. To me, it just gave like, I don't know. You'd have to read it. Like the protagonist is married to a black man, and the way that he talks about her being biracial, like there's just a lot more of a difference there. Like I feel like the book really harps on that biracial identity being very separate from blackness, and that's why I struggle with it, because I'm like, that may very well be how the author and other people with that identity feel. And I've always just kind of been of the mind that, like, regardless of what your parents look like, if you look black, you move through the world as a black person, people treat you black and all that type of stuff, and you're black. So it's very clear cut for me in a way that, again, since she's white passing, I guess it is not. That got a little old. Honestly, it got a little old for me. I didn't really find the humor in it. And as I'm talking more about it, it may sound like I didn't like this book, but actually, when I say that it made me realize I messed up my ranking, this book will go on my top 5. It's very well written. I do think that one of the good things about it is that there's a lot of commentary on how, especially in the Hollywood space and the media space, that we talk about and view stories about race. I think that's a core part of the book. And I think she did a good job at that. So yeah, if I had not already put something in the number 5 spot, this will go in number 5. But my highest available ranking is number 8, so it's gonna have to go in number 8. Next up, Royal Holiday by Jasmine Guillory. Now, you should know I am not a romance girly. This is the only romance book that I read in 2024, but I really was of the mind that I wanted to read a Christmas book. This was like the first one I saw, so I was like, fine. I did enjoy it. I thought it was a pleasant book. It's basically, it's sort of it's a romance about an older couple. I know that some people said that threw them off. It didn't really throw me off. It's not smutty at all, because I don't really like that sort of thing. So it's not like, I'm not gonna go into description, but basically it's about this woman who, her daughter is a stylist, and she's called to style the Duchess of somewhere, but in London, in the royal family. But yeah, the Duchess. And she says, Mom, come along and spend this time with me for Christmas in London. And of course she meets this man who, I think he's the Queen's private secretary. And they hit it off, and it's about their journey to being together. I feel like this book revealed that I might have some intimacy issues, because like they started holding hands and I was like, whoa, that's a lot. And I'm like, it's really actually not. It's very normal. That's what normal people do. So it evened out a little bit for me. I'm not a super romantic person, so romance can be like, not cringy. It's not cringy because I think it's good like for people who like romance, but it makes me a little uncomfortable sometimes, and because I just don't like it I don't like get my hopes up. Like I love love, but I'm not like a super romantic person. So I'm kind of somewhere in the middle, and so sometimes like super romantic things can make me a bit uncomfortable. One thing that really surprised me about this book, especially because I know that Jasmine Guillory is a very popular romance author, it's not necessarily that I had a problem with the way that it was written, but it definitely like could use a thesaurus. Like when I tell you, like, I kid you not, there was one page that had like the same like two or three sentences, and then on the back page it was the exact same 2 or 3 sentences. The sentence like, oh, she smiled at him, or he smiled at her, or she grinned at him, or he grinned at her, those 2 things happened quite literally on every single page. And I know that it's supposed to build up that anticipation of like, oh, they like each other, they're smiling at each other, like that sort of thing. But like, I just feel like there are a lot of different ways that people can flirt and let on their affection for each other that is not smiling. And I think that that variety was definitely needed because it was super, super noticeable to me. Like, there needed to be a thesaurus involved, honestly. Luckily, I thought the story was pleasant enough that didn't take me out of it. It didn't make me dislike the book or anything like that, but it was certainly noticeable. I also think that the points of conflict could have been a little bit more fleshed out. I think that maybe the fact that it's supposed to be an easy read, like, again, with the vocabulary and also the conflict, like, maybe she just didn't want to have too much friction. But like, in a story, there's a climax and there's a little bit of conflict that is supposed to throw a wrench into things. And I felt like every time that happened, for the most part, it was resolved in like a paragraph. And it's not that I wanted them to be struggling, and I like, please, I don't need no more representation of struggle love, like, but I don't know, like, I just felt like it could use that. I mean, it's not a huge book, but it's not a small book either, and I think that there was room for it. I also think that I would have had a better time reading this if it wasn't in my last 2 weeks of the year sprint to the finish stupid thing I put myself through. And that being said, I'm gonna put it at number 9. Up next, my year of rest and relaxation. Now this goes into our last spot in our top 5. This is number 3 for me. I really, really liked this book. This was my formal intro to what is called sad girl literature, which I was like, that's what I like. That's the genre for me. Obviously, it's not the only thing that I'm, gonna be reading, because like we need to calibrate a little bit. But this genre of like depressed, kind of fucked up, weird women, like, is to an extent what I really enjoy. And the protagonist in this book just has a really, really messed up time of it, and decides that she wants to restart and reset her life by trying to sleep for an entire year. So she's using a ton of drugs, and just doing a lot of unhealthy things. And she has all these times that she's like blacking out and like just definitely not facing her problems head on. Also, part of it is the fact that this protagonist has the seemingly perfect life. She is quite rich. Her parents left her a lot of money. She is, at least by her standards, very pretty, and basically just has a lot of things that other people would want. But obviously, when you're reading about her life, does not have the circumstances that one would want. And I think what I really liked about this book is that it taps into a specific feeling when it comes to being incredibly, depressed, that a lot of people who have never felt it don't really understand, because the external circumstances of your life could really look like anything, and there are just, sometimes the answer is not obvious. Sometimes the answer really, really eludes you, the answer to happiness and the answer to being content, and just being okay. And I think this is someone who is at their wit's end with it, and decides, you know what, I'm gonna start over next year in a way that is just like completely and totally insane. Like trying to sleep for a year. Like when I tell you she's trying to sleep for a year, she's literally trying to be unconscious for 365 days. It's crazy. But as the story unravels, you can tell by the circumstances of her childhood, at least emotionally, and also some of the other close relationships that she has, like her on again, off again boyfriend. There's just not a lot of good there, and it really shows how important that internal life, internal peace, and safety is for someone. Because if they don't have it, especially if they don't have it from, when they're a kid, and sometimes even when they do have it, like stuff be happening and that's like out of your control up here, I just felt like it really tapped into a feeling that it's not easy to describe usually And there might be people who have never felt it that would read this book and still be like, I don't understand what she's so like sad about. And that's fine, but it's number 3 for me. Okay, Stolen Focus by Johann Hari, or Harry. Sorry if I'm saying his name wrong. This was the only nonfiction book I read this year or last year. Well, actually, this is the one book that carried over because I didn't want to not retain anything. I was pretty pleasantly surprised when I started reading this book, only because it wasn't as boring as I thought it was going to be, simply because like self-help and stuff like that is not really my bag. And I just wasn't sure how he was going to make it not boring. And I do think that, especially at the beginning, he did a really good job of weaving in research and stuff with narrative and story. And yeah, I wasn't expecting that. However, comma space. The further I got in the book, I did think that, like, I don't know if like he had a word count to hit or whatever, but like it just felt like there are parts of the book that are longer than they need to be. Like I said, there's a lot of narrative to it, and so I felt like the author tried to bake in a lot of anecdotal evidence and stuff like that. There's an incredible amount of like research and stuff like that. And I do think that he does a great job of trying to represent the different sides of these scientific arguments and stuff like that. That's not the issue. But when it comes to these examples and anecdotes and things like that, sometimes he would do like multiple for one concept that I just, like, I know people's brains work in different ways, and sometimes when you say something in a different way, it will click better. But I don't think the examples were different enough to warrant having multiple of them. And so it started to feel repetitive at a certain point. And so, I mean, maybe, you know what? One thing I can give him, maybe he's trying to test my focus by being boring. I don't know. But yeah, it got to a point towards the end of the book where I was just like, yo, like, please get to it. It just got a little off topic. Not necessarily, but like it got long-winded in a way I just didn't think it was necessary to like get to the point. I also think a lot of self-help books, you know, they're telling you things that you already know. You know, you're supposed to eat well, you're supposed to sleep well, you're supposed to do all these things that are healthy for you. But like I said, I do think that in the beginning, at least, he did a good job of really laying it out in a way that could actually catch your attention and stuff like that. I just think that towards the end, it wavered for me. So I'm going to put this one at number 11. Next up, we have LA Weather. Now, I actually didn't even really remember until earlier this week that this book, a part of it is the imminent threat of wildfires. And of course, as you know, there have been some pretty crazy wildfires here in LA at the beginning of this year. So yeah, that was just a weird coincidence. But basically this book centers around these 3 sisters and their family. Their dad has this sort of like big secret. He's been acting really, really strange. The mom is very fed up with it. These sisters are adults, by the way, but their mom is very fed up with it. And after like 30 years of marriage, she's like kind of like, yes, so if you don't clean up his act, I'm finna dip. And they're like, girl, what the hell? And then of course, all the sisters are dealing with their own things. One is a celebrity chef in this like kind of weird, not great marriage. Another one is an architect who is also, she's in a terrible, straight up terrible marriage, like whoa. And also is dealing with some other family things. And the third one, she's like an influencer, I think. And she also had some pretty like traumatic stuff happen in her childhood, which doesn't really get like touched on a lot. The book itself is not traumatic at all. But you know, they are 3 adult women who are navigating their way through just, you know, life. And there is something that happened in the family that kind of forces them to all be brought together in this close space. And yeah, it's, you know, it's a very like family oriented, not oriented in the subject matter, but it explores the family dynamic a lot. I thought the book was just okay. It was fine, you know, like I wasn't super into it. I wasn't like crazy bored reading it either. I don't know. There was some things that the characters did that frustrated me, but it's really like not that high for me. It was fine. Like, I think that I reached a point where I was like, yeah, I just kind of want to finish it. But I honestly, to me, the worst thing a book can be is boring, with the exception of one book. That was the worst book I ever read. And if you're familiar with my lore, then you know exactly what book I'm talking about. I always say that I think I'd rather a book be boring than be bad, except for that one book. That book was very, very bad. But yeah, that's one of my like core barometers was I bored? I was not bored reading this book. And for that reason, I think I will put it at number 10. No, wait, I'm at number 13. Who gonna check me? Number 13. All right, y'all. Here's the deal. Shut Up, You're Pretty by Taya Mutanji. After I read my Rest and Relaxation, like I said, I was really interested in this sad girl literature subgenre. And so I decided to look at, some more books that fell into that. Got this recommendation. I like the title. I like the fact that it was written by a Congolese author. She's Congolese Canadian. I think she immigrated to Canada when she was a child. I thought that brought in a different, perspective to Black womanhood that I'm removed from. I don't know anything about it. And what it's like to be an immigrant, to come of age in. Well, I'll talk about, the environment that she was coming of age in. So yeah, I was really, really excited to read this book. Y'all, I was so unsettled reading this book. I felt like it's short stories, by the way, which is another reason why I felt like I was struggling with them. Because I just felt like every story I read, I was on the brink of giving up. I honestly probably should have given up. I probably should not have finished this book because of how uncomfortable I was reading it. There's just like, it comes to a point, it was unsettling. Some of the subject matter, I don't even know if I can say it on YouTube, but it was really hard to stomach some of the things that happened to this girl, because she's a child for some of this book. And some of the subject matter was just, it was adult, it was abusive, and I'm honestly having a bad time thinking about it right now. But I also know that for some people that's their reality. I personally don't like to feel unsettled and uncomfortable and just, I don't even know, as bad as this book made me feel in my free time. That doesn't mean I only read things that are super happy and there's no conflict and all that, but it just comes to a point for me. And it came to a point where like I felt at times kind of sick reading this book. I wish I liked it more. I really, really do. It's for somebody. It's not for me. I thought that there were times when the writing was really, really good, and that was the saving grace of the book for me. I think that Mutanji is a great writer, but I frankly, I can't trust her. After this book, I just can't trust it. There were just some things that I'm just like, girl, why would you put me through that? So this is gonna have to go in my second to last spot at number 14. Again, you might really, really like the book. Very well written. It's just a subject matter. If you are somebody who's very sensitive, I feel like I'm sensitive to certain types of things, especially when it comes to children. Like there's just certain things I don't want to hear about happening to children or anybody. Especially like, girl, I'm in my free time. I just want to feel okay, and I did not feel okay reading this book. Well, we only have one more left, so I don't need to pull it out the hat. That is The White Butterfly by Walter Mosley. That sounds familiar. Walter Mosley is who wrote the book that's in the last slot in my rankings. This book is higher. And it's important to note that this book is in his wheelhouse. Like I said, he is known for his mystery novels, particularly his Easy Rawlins series. Easy Rawlins is his hard-boiled detective character. He's not really a detective. He's like, you know how they be like, he's he's actually like an insider in the community, and they call him when the police can't crack the case, and he has these connections, you know, that sort of thing. I'm not a really big mystery reader, but I try to read widely. That's why you see a couple different genres here, even though I think literary fiction is by far what I read the most. I decided to read this because I know that he was famous for these, and I read this, by the way, before I read The Awkward Black Man. So this is the first Walter Mosley novel I've ever read. It was fine. I think in my rankings, this puts it at number 10, which I think is pretty accurate. It could go a little higher, and I wouldn't feel uncomfortable with that. I read this really, really early in the year. It might have been like the second book I read this year, second or third. So I can't say I remember a whole lot about it, but you know, it's a mystery novel he's solving. I think there's like a person who is young girls, and not young like children, but like young women. It's not graphic. It doesn't really dive into like the actual act of doing that, because like I said before, that would not really sit well with me. I do think it really made me think more about like the intentions of the author, and when they write imperfect characters, especially ones that do things that are really on the line of morality, what exactly is the author trying to say? You know what I mean? Like, is the character doing this and thinking that it's right, or is the character doing it because they are a flawed character? And I think what made that was one of the things that Easy Rawlins did in the novel. I won't spoil it for you, but that's what really made me kind of tackle that question. And what made it even harder for me to answer was the fact that, one, this was written by a man, and the fact that, two, it was written 30 years ago when times were a little different. And so what this character did, I had a really hard time sort of discerning whether or not the author just wrote him doing that because he thought it was normal, or he wrote him doing that because it was supposed to make his character sort of hard to get behind. That being said, yeah, I thought it was cool. I think after I read the book, I remember being like, it was fine, but I would read something else by Walter Mosley. That was The Awkward Black Man. Obviously, that didn't go how I intended it to go. But even with that being said, I can tell why this is his wheelhouse, these mystery novels. And I would read another Walter Mosley mystery novel because he is the author I read the most in 2024, just 2 books. I probably won't really read him in 2025 because while I would at some point, I'm not really like chomping at the bit to do that. But, you know, if I come across another book of his, you know, I might pick it up. So with that is my 2024 blind ranking. There are some things I could change around. Obviously, the one glaring one is my top 5. I'm sorry, girl. Issa, I love you, but your book should not have been number 5. I think Color Television should have been number 5. And then maybe Awkward Black Girl could have been number 6 and then move everything else down. But overall, I think I did pretty good at ranking it accurately with how I felt about the books. Let me know if you have read any of these books and what you thought. Would you read any of them? Has my commentary swayed you one way or the other? Let me know in the comments. These are my social media handles. You can follow me elsewhere if you would like to. You can also subscribe to this channel and click the little bell icon so that you can get a notification every time I get off my butt and post a video. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.